Get up now. The flight attendant's voice cuts through the cabin like broken glass, sharp and demanding. Her perfectly manicured finger points at the two young black women in first class, row 3A and 3B. These seats aren't yours. Malia Obama's hand freezes on her laptop keyboard. Beside her, Sasha's music stops mid-beat as she pulls out her earbuds. The entire first-class cabin falls silent, 12 pairs of eyes turning to watch. Excuse me. Malia's voice stays measured, but her fingers grip the armrest. You heard me. The attendant, her name tag reads PATRICIA, plants her hands on her hips. Her blonde bob doesn't move as she shakes her head. There's been a mistake. These seats belong to other passengers. A man in a pressed golf shirt leans forward from row 4, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone used to being heard. Finally, I told you something was wrong when I saw them board. But to understand how we got here, how two young women found themselves at the center of a confrontation that would soon involve Secret Service, airline executives, and a former president of the United States, we need to go back 3 hours. Chicago's O'Hare Airport buzzes with its usual controlled chaos this December morning. Holiday travelers drag overstuffed suitcases past gates, children clutch tablets playing the same cartoon on repeat, and the smell of overpriced coffee mingles with industrial carpet cleaner. Gate B18 fills steadily for the 11:45 a.m. flight to Los Angeles. Malia adjusts her baseball cap lower, a practiced movement she's perfected over years of trying to blend in. At 25, she's learned to navigate public spaces with a careful balance, friendly enough not to seem aloof, distant enough to discourage long conversations. Her sister Sasha, 2 years younger, scrolls through her phone, occasionally showing Malia something that makes them both laugh quietly. They travel light, just carry-ons and backpacks. Their Secret Service detail maintains a professional distance, 2 agents positioned strategically near the gate. After years of protection, the Obama sisters have developed an almost telepathic communication with their security team. A slight nod means everything's fine. A subtle hand gesture means create some space. Before you hear the rest of this story, and trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Are you at home? On your commute? We love knowing our community spans the globe, all connected by stories that matter. Richard Brennan checks his Rolex for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. 62 years old, recently retired from running a manufacturing company, he's not used to waiting. His wife Linda fans herself with the boarding pass, despite the airport's aggressive air conditioning. I still don't understand why we couldn't take the company jet, Linda says, not for the first time. Because I don't own the company anymore, remember? Richard's tone carries an edge of bitterness. Retirement wasn't entirely his choice. The board suggested it was time for fresh leadership. 30 years building that company, and they ease him out with a golden parachute and a pat on the back. First class is fine, Linda says, though her tone suggests otherwise. At least we're in the front. Richard grunts, watching the gate area fill. His eyes narrow as he notices the 2 young black women sitting in the corner, both wearing baseball caps and keeping to themselves. Something about them seems familiar, but he can't place it. He's about to dismiss the thought when he notices something else. 2 men in dark suits positioned nearby, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Security, he mutters to Linda. What? Those 2, they're obviously security, probably some celebrity. Linda cranes her neck. Oh, maybe it's someone famous. Remember when we saw that actor in Miami? But Richard's mind goes elsewhere. In his experience, security means money. Money means power. And in his world, power has always looked a certain way. Patricia Morrison has been a flight attendant for 15 years, and she prides herself on reading passengers before they even board. Business travelers want efficiency. Families need patience. First-time flyers require reassurance. She's good at her job, or at least she thinks she is. Standing at the gate, she watches the priority boarding line form. Her eyes catch on the 2 young women who move with a certain confidence that makes her frown. They're young, dressed casually in designer athletic wear that Patricia recognizes from her daughter's wish list, the kind of clothes that cost more than they should for what they are. Probably influencers, she says to Derek, her colleague working the gate. Maybe, Derek responds, scanning boarding passes. We've got a pretty full flight. Couple of upgrades cleared last minute. Patricia's frown deepens. She's seen it before, young people using points or upgrades to sit in first class, taking seats from real passengers who paid full price. It bothers her in a way she doesn't fully examine, this sense that some people don't belong in certain spaces. The boarding announcement crackles through the speakers. Priority boarding begins, and Patricia positions herself at the jet bridge entrance, her professional smile fixed in place. Malia and Sasha board with the first group, their movements practiced and unobtrusive. They've learned over the years how to navigate public spaces. Keep your head down but not too far down, move with purpose but don't rush, be polite but don't invite conversation. Good morning, Malia says to Patricia, handing over her boarding pass. Patricia scans it and her eyebrows rise slightly. First class, seats 3A and 3B. She looks at the young woman more carefully, taking in the expensive sneakers, the designer backpack, the subtle but quality jewelry. Upgraded? Patricia asks, her tone suggesting she already knows the answer. No, Malia responds simply, taking her boarding pass back. Patricia watches them walk down the jet bridge, something nagging at her. She turns to Derek. Did you see their names? Derek shrugs. Didn't pay attention. Why? No reason. But Patricia's mind is already working, creating a story about who these young women might be, how they might have gotten those seats. Richard and Linda board minutes later, Richard's mood improving slightly when Patricia greets him with appropriate deference. Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, welcome aboard. You're in 4A and 4B today. Richard had specifically requested 3A and 3B when booking. His assistant had assured him the seats were confirmed. When he enters the first-class cabin, he sees they're already occupied. The two young women from the gate area are settling in, the one by the window pulling out a laptop covered in stickers, the other untangling earbuds. Richard's jaw tightens. Excuse me, he says to Patricia, who's helping another passenger with overhead luggage. There seems to be a mistake. We were supposed to be in row 3. Patricia checks her tablet. I show you in 4A and 4B, Mr. Brennan. That's wrong. Check again. Patricia's fingers move across the screen. The system shows 3A and 3B were assigned 3 weeks ago. Your seats are definitely 4A and 4B. Richard's face reddens. 3 weeks ago. His tickets were purchased 2 months ago. He looks again at the two young women, now both absorbed in their devices, seemingly oblivious to his presence. This is unacceptable, he says, his voice rising enough that several passengers look up. I want to speak to someone in charge. Patricia feels a familiar alliance forming, the kind that happens when a passenger she perceives as important shares her unspoken suspicions. Let me see what I can do, Mr. Brennan. Please take your seats for now and I'll look into this. Richard sits heavily in 4A, his anger simmering. Linda pats his arm. It's just one row back, honey. It's the principal, Richard mutters, pulling out his phone. He starts typing an email to the airline's customer service, his fingers jabbing at the screen. Behind them in row 7 sits Margaret Chen, a retired high school principal who's been watching the interaction with interest. At 71, she's seen enough in her life to recognize certain patterns. The way Richard looked at those young women, the flight attendants' eager compliance, the assumptions being made. Margaret taught in Chicago public schools for 40 years. She's seen brilliant students dismissed because of their skin color, watched potential wither under the weight of others' expectations. She retired 5 years ago, but the teacher in her never really left. She watches Patricia lean in to whisper something to another flight attendant, both of them glancing toward row 3. Margaret's stomach tightens with familiar dread. The plane fills steadily. In row 12, James Patterson, no relation to the author, a joke he's tired of making, settles in for what he hopes will be an uneventful flight. A software engineer heading to a tech conference, he's got code to review and little patience for drama. But even he notices the tension in first class, the way the flight attendants keep conferring, shooting looks toward the front of the cabin. In the last row of first class, Diana Reeves adjusts her reading glasses and opens her Kindle. A retired federal judge, she's looking forward to losing herself in a mystery novel for the 5-hour flight. But her trained ear picks up the undercurrent of conflict, the particular frequency of brewing trouble she learned to recognize during 30 years on the bench. The cabin door closes, and the plane pushes back from the gate. The safety demonstration begins, but Patricia's mind is elsewhere. She's convinced herself something isn't right about those two young women in 3A and 3B. They're too young for first class, too casual too. Something she won't name but feels with conviction. As the plane taxis toward the runway, she makes a decision. Once they're at cruising altitude, she'll check the manifest more carefully. There must be some mistake. She'll fix it. She's just doing her job after all. The plane lifts off, Chicago shrinking below. Malia closes her laptop, deciding to rest during the climb. Sasha's already lost in her music, eyes closed, fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. Neither of them notices Patricia watching them from the galley, her expression hardening with resolve. 40 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign dims. Patricia immediately pulls up the passenger manifest on her tablet, scrolling through with practiced efficiency. Her finger stops on row 3. M. Obama. S. Obama. The names stare back at her, but instead of recognition, Patricia feels vindication. Obama. She's heard that name before, of course, but it's not uncommon. There are thousands of Obamas. These are clearly not the former president's daughters. They would have had Secret Service, special boarding, airline executives greeting them. No, these must be two young women using a famous name to their advantage, perhaps counting on flight crews being too nervous to question them. She shows the screen to Derek. Look at this. Derek glances over. Obama like the Obama. Don't be ridiculous, Patricia says. If they were the real Obama daughters, don't you think we'd have been notified? There would be protocols. These are obviously just two girls with the same last name trying to get special treatment. Derek looks uncertain. I don't know, Pat. Maybe we should. Should what? Let people take advantage of the system. Patricia's voice hardens. I've seen this before. People banking on a famous name to get upgrades, better service. It's fraud, basically. But their tickets are legitimate. Are they? Or did someone make a mistake, upgrade them because of the name without verifying? Patricia's mind is made up. Mr. Brennan is a valued customer. He flies with us 8 times a year, always first class. These girls, first time I've seen them. She walks purposefully toward row 3, her professional smile replaced with stern determination. The moment has arrived, the confrontation that will soon spiral beyond anyone's imagination. Get up, now! The words come out harsher than Patricia intended, but she's committed now. These seats aren't yours. The entire first-class cabin turns to watch. Richard Brennan sits forward, a satisfied smirk playing at his lips. Finally, someone's doing something about it. Malia's face remains calm, but her mind races. She and Sasha have dealt with situations like this before, people who don't recognize them, who make assumptions. Usually it resolves quickly once identification is checked. But something about this flight attendant's tone, the way she's standing, the aggression in her posture, tells Malia this is different. I'm sorry, there must be some confusion, Malia says, her voice steady. We have boarding passes for these seats. Boarding passes can be mistaken, Patricia responds. I need you to move, now. Sasha pulls out her earbuds completely, looking between her sister and the flight attendant. What's going on? These passengers, Patricia gestures toward the Brennans, have priority for these seats. Based on what? Malia asks, genuinely curious about what explanation could possibly be offered. Patricia falters for a moment, then recovers. Based on their standing with the airline, they're valued customers. And we're not. Sasha's voice carries an edge that Malia recognizes, her sister's patience wearing thin. From row 7, Margaret Chen unbuckles her seatbelt and stands. Excuse me, she calls out. What exactly is the problem here? Patricia turns, irritated by the interruption. Ma'am, please remain seated. This doesn't concern you. I think it does, Margaret says, moving forward despite the disapproving look. I watched these young women board properly. They showed their boarding passes. They're in their assigned seats. What possible reason could you have for asking them to move? Richard Brennan stands now too. The reason is that those are our seats. We're premier members. We specifically requested row 3. Margaret looks at him steadily. And did the airline confirm those seats for you? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. Diana Reeves interjects from row 16, her judicial bearing evident even seated. Either the seats were assigned to you or they weren't. This isn't a matter of preference or status. It's a matter of legitimate ticketing. Patricia feels the situation slipping from her control. Other passengers are pulling out phones, some clearly recording. Derek stands frozen in the galley, wanting to intervene but unsure how. Everyone needs to calm down, Patricia says, though she's the one who seems most agitated. I'm simply trying to resolve a seating issue. By demanding 2 passengers vacate their legitimate seats. Diana stands now, her years of legal authority evident in her posture. On what grounds? What policy allows you to remove passengers from seats they've paid for and been assigned? Patricia's face flushes. She's used to passengers complying to her authority being absolute in the cabin. I have reason to believe there's been a fraudulent use of... Fraudulent? Malia interrupts, her calm finally breaking. Are you actually accusing us of fraud? The word hangs in the air like a challenge. Several passengers gasp. More phones come out. From the back of first class, James Patterson speaks up. You know, I can see the passenger manifest on my airline app. Want me to check who's actually supposed to be in those seats? That won't be necessary, Patricia says quickly, but James is already scrolling. Huh, he says. M. Obama and S. Obama, seats 3A and 3B booked 3 weeks ago, fully paid, confirmed. He looks up. Seems pretty clear-cut to me. Richard's face darkens. Obama. They're claiming to be. We're not claiming anything, Sasha says firmly. We're just trying to fly to LA in the seats we paid for. Patricia sees her mistake now but can't back down. She's gone too far, made too many accusations. I still need to verify their identification. Did you verify his? Margaret points to Richard. Or did you just take his word that he deserved those seats? The question lands like a slap. Patricia realizes that no, she hadn't asked Richard for any verification. She'd simply believed him, trusted his indignation, shared his assumption that something was wrong with two young black women in first class. That's different, Patricia stammers. How? Diana asks, her voice carrying the weight of countless similar moments she's witnessed in courtrooms. How exactly is it different? The cabin has become a courtroom of sorts, with Patricia on trial and a jury of passengers watching. Even those who initially seemed sympathetic to Richard's complaint now look uncomfortable. Linda Brennan tugs at her husband's sleeve. "Richard, sit down. This is embarrassing." But Richard's past being told what to do by his board, by his wife, and now by a cabin full of strangers. "I want to speak to the captain." "The captain is flying the plane," Derek finally speaks up, finding his voice. "Sir, please take your seat." Malia pulls out her phone. "I'm calling our..." She pauses, choosing her words carefully. "Our travel coordinator." Patricia lunges forward. "You can't use your phone during flight." "We're at cruising altitude," James calls out. "Phones are allowed in airplane mode and she can use Wi-Fi calling." Malia is already dialing. The phone rings once before a familiar voice answers, not their father, but someone else, someone expecting this call because the Secret Service agents on board have already alerted the situation through their own channels. "Miss Obama." "We're aware of the situation. Help is on the way." Patricia hears only Malia's side. "Yes, no, we're fine. The flight attendant is insisting we move from our seats. She's accused us of fraud." The word fraud seems to echo through the cabin again. Patricia's hands shake slightly. Some part of her recognizes she's made a terrible mistake, but she's trapped by her own momentum. "I need to see your identification," she says again, as if this will somehow vindicate her actions. Malia reaches for her wallet, but Sasha stops her. "No, we don't have to show you anything. We showed our boarding passes. That's all that's required." She's right, of course. Deanna Reeves knows it. Margaret Chen knows it. Even some of the passengers who initially supported Richard know it. But Patricia has convinced herself this is about something bigger, about order, about rules, about things being the way they're supposed to be. The plane continues its westward journey, but inside the cabin, time seems suspended. The confrontation has drawn battle lines, revealed assumptions, exposed the fault lines that run through every public space in America. Take a moment, if you're still with us, to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Are you surprised by how this is unfolding? Have you witnessed something similar? Your stories matter to us. In the cockpit, Captain Jerome Williams receives an unusual message from ground control. He reads it twice, hardly believing what he's seeing. He turns to his co-pilot, Sarah Martinez. "We have a situation in the cabin," he says carefully. "Apparently, someone is trying to remove the Obama daughters from their seats." Sarah's eyes widen. "The Obama daughters, as in President Obama's daughters. That's what ground control is indicating. Secret Service is involved." Jerome unbuckles. "Take the controls. I need to handle this personally." He moves through the cockpit door with the authority that comes from 25 years of flying, 15 as a captain. The first thing he notices is the cluster of people standing in first class, never a good sign. The second thing he notices is Patricia, red-faced and defensive, confronting two young women who look remarkably composed given the circumstances. "What's going on here?" His captain's voice cuts through the tension. Patricia spins around, relief flooding her face. "Captain, thank God." "You have a situation with these passengers." "The Obama sisters?" Jerome asks directly. The cabin goes completely silent. Patricia's mouth opens and closes like a fish gasping for air. What? No, they're not. They can't be." Jerome looks at Malia and Sasha. Miss Obama, I apologize for this disturbance. Are you both all right?" Malia nods. "We're fine, Captain. There seems to be some confusion about our seats." "There's no confusion," Jerome states firmly. "You're in your assigned seats." "Patricia, I need to see you in the galley, now." Patricia follows him, her legs unsteady. Richard Brennan sinks into his seat, his face transitioning from red to pale. The reality of what's happening, what he's participated in, begins to dawn on him. In the galley, Jerome's voice is low but firm. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I thought. They looked so young, and the name. I didn't think they were really." "You didn't think? That's the problem. You made assumptions based on what? Their age. Their race?" Patricia can't answer because any answer would confirm what she doesn't want to admit about herself. "Secret Service is already aware of this situation," Jerome continues. "Ground control is involved. This is now a federal matter." The blood drains from Patricia's face. "Federal? You attempted to remove protected individuals from their seats based on... what exactly? A customer complaint? Your own prejudices?" Meanwhile, back in the cabin, Margaret Chen has moved to sit across the aisle from Malia and Sasha. "I'm so sorry you had to experience this," she says softly. "I taught high school for 40 years. I've seen too much of this kind of thing." Sasha manages a small smile. "Thank you for speaking up. Not everyone does." "More should," Diana Reeves adds, having moved closer as well. I'm a retired federal judge if you need any witnesses to what occurred here. The solidarity forms organically. Passengers who moments ago were strangers now united in their recognition of injustice. Even some who initially said nothing now express support, ashamed of their silence. James Patterson approaches with his laptop. I recorded the whole thing if you need it. The way she spoke to you was completely unacceptable. Richard Brennan remains in his seat, trying to become invisible. Linda whispers urgently to him, but he doesn't respond. His mind is calculating the implications. The viral video that's surely coming, the damage to his reputation, the lawsuit he might face. The retirement he resented suddenly seems like a refuge he might not be able to return to. Captain Williams returns to the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to address what just occurred. 2 of our passengers were subjected to inappropriate treatment by a member of our crew. This is not representative of our airline's values or policies. Miss Obama, on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize. He turns to Patricia, who has followed him out of the galley. Patricia, you'll be taking a seat in the back for the remainder of the flight. Derek will handle first class. Patricia walks through the cabin like a condemned prisoner, every eye following her retreat. She knows her career is over, 15 years dissolved in 15 minutes of prejudice she can no longer deny. The captain isn't finished. Mr. Brennan, I understand you were involved in this incident as well. Richard looks up, attempting outrage. I was just asking about my seats. You were demanding that 2 passengers be removed to accommodate you despite having no legitimate claim to their seats. That's interference with a flight crew and could be considered harassment of other passengers. I didn't mean. Intent doesn't matter. Actions do. The captain's voice carries the weight of authority. You'll remain in your assigned seats and not interact with the affected passengers for the remainder of this flight. The next 2 hours pass in strange suspension. The cabin service continues, but there's an underlying current of tension, shame, and reflection. Patricia sits in a jump seat in the back, staring at nothing, replaying every moment, every assumption, every small prejudice that led to this moment. She thinks about other times, passengers she'd treated differently without admitting why, assumptions she'd made based on appearance, the subtle ways she'd enforced her own ideas about who belonged where. The recognition is crushing. Richard stares out the window at clouds, seeing his reflection more clearly than he has in years. The successful businessman, the self-made man, the person who earned his place. How much of it was real merit, and how much was the accident of being born into circumstances that opened doors others had to fight to crack open? He thinks about his company, the board that pushed him out. Had he been like Patricia, so convinced of his own righteousness that he couldn't see his biases? Is that why they wanted fresh leadership? The thoughts are uncomfortable, unwelcome, but unavoidable at 30,000 feet with nowhere to run. An hour before landing, an unexpected announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We'll be making an unscheduled stop in Denver due to a passenger needing to deplane. Confusion ripples through the cabin. Medical emergency, but no one seems sick. The plane descends into Denver, and as it taxis to the gate, passengers see an unusual sight, multiple black SUVs on the tarmac, men in suits waiting by the jet bridge. Patricia is escorted off first, not in handcuffs, but clearly not by choice. She doesn't look back, doesn't make eye contact with anyone. Her career, her assumptions, her certainties, all left behind in that aluminum tube. But then something unexpected happens. The jet bridge door opens again, and a familiar figure walks on board. The entire cabin gasps almost in unison. Barack Obama enters, his presence immediately filling the space. He's wearing jeans and a casual shirt, but his bearing is unmistakably presidential. He walks directly to row 3. Hi, Dad, Malia says, as if this is perfectly normal. Heard you had some trouble, he responds, his voice carrying that familiar measured tone that commanded worldwide attention for 8 years. He turns to address the cabin, and everyone, even Richard Brennan, leans forward. My daughters called me about what happened here today. They told me about those of you who stood up for them, Mrs. Chen, Judge Reeves, Mr. Patterson, and others. They also told me about those who didn't. His gaze passes over Richard, not lingering but noted. What happened here isn't unique. It happens every day in different ways to different people. The difference today is that it happened to people with resources, with protection, with a voice that will be heard. But imagine if it hadn't. Imagine if these were just 2 young women with no famous father, no secret service, no recourse. The cabin is silent, absorbing every word. Mrs. Chen, thank you for being a teacher even when you're not in a classroom. Judge Reeves, thank you for bringing justice even at 30,000 feet. Mr. Patterson, thank you for using technology to document truth. These actions matter. They change things one moment at a time. He looks at Richard now, directly but not unkindly. Mr. Brennan, my daughters tell me you're a businessman, recently retired. I've been there, the transition from power to ordinary citizen. It's hard, but it's also an opportunity to see things from a different angle, to understand perspectives you might have missed from the top. I hope you'll take that opportunity. Richard can't speak. He nods, his throat tight with an emotion he can't name. Obama continues. The flight attendant who was removed, she'll face consequences for her actions today, but I hope she'll also face the harder task of examining why she acted as she did. That's the work we all need to do, examining our assumptions, questioning our biases, doing better. He turns back to his daughters. You two okay to continue to LA? We're fine, Dad, Sasha says. You didn't have to come. Of course I did. That's what fathers do. But also, he smiles that famous smile, I wanted to see if what happened here could become a teaching moment, not just for this cabin, but for everyone who will hear this story. He addresses the cabin one more time. You all have phones, this story will spread. When it does, I hope it spreads with the full context, not just the confrontation, but the conversation after. Not just the problem, but the people who stood up against it. Not just the bias, but the possibility of becoming better. He shakes hands with those who spoke up, poses for a few pictures with passengers who ask respectfully, and then prepares to leave. Aren't you flying with us? Margaret Chen asks. No, I've got my own ride back to D.C., but my daughters will continue to L.A. in their assigned seats with the dignity and respect they deserve, that everyone deserves. As he leaves, he stops by Richard's row. Mr. Brennan, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we recognize them. Richard finally finds his voice. Mr. President, I'm sorry I was wrong. Obama nods. Apologize to them, not me, he says, gesturing to his daughters. After Obama departs, the plane prepares for takeoff again. Richard stands, his legs unsteady, and walks to row 3. Linda follows, her face streaked with tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. I owe you both an apology, Richard says, his voice rough. I made assumptions I had no right to make. I acted in a way that was racist. I'm sorry. Melia looks at him for a long moment. Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. Especially publicly, Sasha adds, but that's how change happens, publicly, vocally, repeatedly. The plane takes off again, rising above Denver toward Los Angeles. The remaining flight time passes differently. Conversations spark across rows, Margaret sharing teaching stories with Diana, James discussing technology and bias with other passengers, even Richard and Linda talking quietly about things they need to reconsider, biases they need to confront. Derek, now handling first-class service alone, moves through the cabin with extra care, extra consideration. He's thinking about his own actions, his silence when Patricia first voiced her suspicions. He could have stopped this earlier. He should have. Can I get you anything? He asks Melia and Sasha when drink service begins. Just water, thanks, Melia says. And Derek, it's not your fault, but next time speak up sooner. He nods, understanding the weight of that advice. As the plane crosses into California airspace, Diana Reeves stands and addresses the cabin one more time. If I may, as someone who spent 30 years in law, I want to say something. What we witnessed today was wrong, but what we did about it matters more. Every one of us has the power to interrupt injustice when we see it. Use that power. The landing in Los Angeles is smooth. As passengers prepare to deplane, there's an unusual energy, not the typical rush to grab bags and push forward, but something more thoughtful. People exchange contact information, promise to stay in touch, to remember this flight. Richard and Linda are among the last to leave. As they pass row 3, Richard stops once more. I'm going to do better, he tells the Obama sisters. I promise you that. Don't promise us, Melia responds. Promise yourself, promise your community, and then actually do it. The sisters deplane to find a small crowd of airline executives waiting, full of apologies and offers of compensation. They decline most of it, asking instead that the airline institute better training, better policies, better practices. This isn't about free flights or upgrades, Sasha explains. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to the next person who doesn't have a famous father or Secret Service protection. In the weeks that follow, the story does indeed spread. Video from multiple passengers goes viral, but so does the conversation after. Obama's words, the passengers' interventions, the apologies and promises to do better. Patricia, facing termination and public shame, enters counseling. She writes a public letter acknowledging her actions, her biases, and her commitment to change. It's painful, humbling work, but necessary. Richard and Linda return to Chicago changed. Richard starts volunteering at a youth center in a predominantly black neighborhood, not as a savior, but as someone learning. He listens more than he talks, learns more than he teaches. Linda joins a racial justice book club, uncomfortable at first, but committed to the discomfort of growth. Margaret Chen returns to occasional substitute teaching, now incorporating lessons about standing up to injustice into every classroom she enters. Diana Reeves comes out of retirement to lead judicial training on implicit bias. James Patterson develops an app for documenting discrimination, inspired by that flight. Derek gets promoted to lead flight attendant, but only after completing extensive training on bias and discrimination. He becomes known for his zero-tolerance policy on passenger harassment, never forgetting his silence that day. The Obama sisters continue their lives, their work, their travels, but they carry with them the memory of strangers who became allies of a moment when people chose to stand up rather than stand by. 6 months later, Margaret Chen receives a letter. It's from Malia Obama thanking her again for her intervention. But there's more. Mrs. Chen, you said you were a teacher. I want you to know you still are. That day you taught everyone on that plane something about courage, about speaking up, about doing what's right even when it's uncomfortable. Those are lessons that lasted long after we landed. Margaret frames the letter, hanging it next to her teaching awards. Of all her accomplishments in education, this one means the most. The lesson taught at 30,000 feet when she wasn't even trying to teach, just trying to be human. Richard Brennan's story takes an unexpected turn. His volunteer work at the youth center leads to him funding a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in business. He names it the Row 3 Scholarship, a reminder of where his real education began. At the first scholarship ceremony, he tells the story of the flight, his shame visible but his growth evident. I spent my whole career thinking I'd earned everything I had through merit alone, he tells the young recipients. But I never acknowledged the advantages I started with, the doors that opened for me that stayed closed for others. This scholarship is about opening those doors. One of the recipients, a young black woman named Jasmine, raises her hand. Mr. Brennan, what made you finally see it? Richard thinks for a moment. Being forced to see myself through other people's eyes, having someone I dismissed as not belonging turn out to be more dignified, more accomplished, more gracious than I'd ever been. Sometimes we need our assumptions shattered publicly to rebuild them properly. Patricia's journey is perhaps the hardest. Unemployable in aviation, she takes a job at a community center, working with immigrant families. Every day she faces her own prejudices, her own assumptions. Every day she tries to do better. A year after the flight, she encounters Sasha Obama at a charity event. Her first instinct is to hide, to avoid the shame, but she forces herself forward. Miss Obama, I don't expect you to remember me. Patricia, Sasha says simply. The flight attendant. Patricia nods, unable to speak for a moment. I wanted to say, I've been working on myself, learning, trying to understand why I did what I did and making sure I never do it again. Sasha studies her for a long moment. Growth is hard, but it's necessary. I'm glad you're doing the work. It's not forgiveness exactly, but it's acknowledgement. Patricia takes it as the gift it is. The ripple effects continue. The airline implements new training programs, featuring the video from that flight as a case study in what not to do. Other airlines follow suit. It becomes known as the Row 3 Protocol, a reminder that every passenger deserves dignity and respect regardless of assumptions about who they are or where they belong. Law schools add the incident to their curriculum on civil rights and discrimination. Business schools use it as a case study in corporate responsibility and bias. It becomes more than just a viral moment. It becomes a teaching tool. 3 years later, at a conference on social justice, many of the passengers from that flight reunite. It's organized by Margaret Chen and Diana Reeves, who have become friends and collaborators. They invite everyone, even Patricia and Richard, because the conference is about growth, not just condemnation. Malia and Sasha Obama deliver the keynote address together. What happened on that flight wasn't unique, Malia begins. Black people, brown people, anyone who doesn't fit someone else's idea of who belongs, we face this constantly. The only difference was that our father could show up and make it a teaching moment. But here's what matters, Sasha continues. Change didn't come from our father showing up. It started with Mrs. Chen standing up, with Judge Reeves speaking out, with Mr. Patterson documenting truth, with everyone who refused to be silent. And it continued, Malia adds, with people like Mr. Brennan and Patricia examining themselves, acknowledging their wrongs, and committing to change. That's hard work, necessary work. The conference is powerful, emotional, transformative. Richard and Patricia participate in a panel on growth after guilt, sharing their journeys with brutal honesty. It's uncomfortable for the audience, but important. I don't get to be the hero of this story, Richard says. I was the villain, but villains can change if they're willing to do the work. I'm trying to do the work. Patricia nods. I lost my career, but I found my conscience. That's not a happy ending, but it's a necessary one. The questions from the audience are hard, challenging. A young black man asks Richard, how do we know you've really changed and aren't just performing for public approval? Richard considers carefully. You don't. And you shouldn't have to trust me. I have to earn that through consistent action over time, not through words at a conference. All I can do is keep showing up, keep learning, keep trying to be better than I was. Margaret Chen moderates with the skill of someone who spent decades managing difficult classroom discussions. She guides the conversation toward productive ends without minimizing pain or glossing over harm. Change is not comfortable, she says. It shouldn't be. Comfort is what allows bias to flourish. Discomfort is what makes us grow. Diana Reeves adds legal perspective. What happened on that plane was discrimination, clear and simple, but the law can only do so much. Real change happens in moments like that, when individuals choose to act, to speak, to stand up. As the conference ends, participants are asked to make commitments, specific, actionable promises about what they'll do differently. Commitments are written on cards and displayed on a wall labeled Row 3 Promises. Richard writes, I will use my remaining wealth and influence to create opportunities for those who have been systematically excluded. Patricia writes, I will spend the rest of my life learning from and serving communities I once dismissed. Margaret writes, I will never stay silent when I witness injustice. Diana writes, I will use my legal knowledge to train others in recognizing and confronting discrimination. James writes, I will use technology to document and prevent bias. Derek, who attended despite his anxiety, writes, I will speak up immediately when I see wrong, regardless of hierarchy or consequence. The wall fills with hundreds of promises. Some will be kept, some will be forgotten, but the act of making them public, of stating them aloud, matters. 5 years after the flight, a documentary is made. It features interviews with all the key players, recreations of the events, and analysis from experts on race, bias, and social change. The most powerful moment comes when Patricia and the Obama sisters sit down together for the first time since that charity event. The conversation is raw, honest, difficult. I hated you that day, Sasha admits. Not just for what you did, but for what you represented, every person who's looked at me and decided I don't belong. Patricia nods, tears flowing. You had every right to hate me. I hated myself when I finally understood what I'd done. But here's the thing, Malia interjects. Hate doesn't create change, accountability does, growth does, the work you've done since, that matters. They don't hug, they don't become friends. But they reach an understanding that change is possible, that people can grow, that moments of ugliness can become catalysts for beauty if we let them. The documentary wins awards, gets shown in schools, becomes part of the cultural conversation about race and privilege in America. But more importantly, it inspires countless small acts of courage, people speaking up in their own, Row 3 moments. A teacher in Texas stops a colleague from discriminating against Latino students. A manager in Seattle intervenes when a black employee is treated unfairly. A teenager in Florida records an incident of bias at their school, leading to policy changes. Each action ripples outward, creating waves of change. 10 years later, as Malia Obama runs for political office, following in her father's footsteps but carving her own path, she's asked about that flight during a campaign event. It shaped me, she says. Not the discrimination I'd faced that before and since, but the response, the people who stood up, the ones who changed. It taught me that progress isn't just possible, it's happening every day in small acts of courage and large admissions of fault. Her campaign manager suggests she avoid the topic. It's divisive, some say, but Malia refuses. If we can't talk about the hard things, we can't fix them. That flight was America in microcosm, the bias, the intervention, the reckoning, the growth. We need more of all of it except the first. She wins her election with Richard Brennan among her unexpected donors. His note with the contribution reads, From Row 4 to Row 3 with respect and remorse. Patricia watches the election results from the community center where she now serves as director. She's built a life of service, of learning, of trying to balance the scales she once tipped. She doesn't celebrate. She has no right to claim any part of this victory. She does feel something like hope, that people can change, that harm can lead to healing, that the worst day of your life doesn't have to define all the days that follow. As our story comes to a close, let's return to that plane, to that moment when everything could have gone differently. What if Margaret Chen hadn't stood up? What if Diana Reeves hadn't spoken out? What if no one had documented what happened? The Obama sisters would have been fine. They had resources, protection, a father who could intervene. But what about the next person? And the next? What about all the people facing discrimination who don't have famous fathers or Secret Service protection? That's why this story matters. Not because it happened to the Obama sisters, but because it happens every day to someone. And every day we have the choice. Stay silent or speak up, maintain comfort or create change, preserve the status quo or demand better. The flight from Chicago to Los Angeles on that December morning became more than just a transportation from one place to another. It became a journey from one understanding to another, from one America to another, from who we are to who we could be. Every passenger on that flight was changed. Some embraced the change, others resisted it, but none could ignore it. The accountant in 12B started speaking up in meetings when he witnessed bias. The retired nurse in 8C joined a racial justice organization. The college student in 15A wrote her thesis on the incident, analyzing it through the lens of social psychology. Even the passengers who said nothing that day were affected. Their silence haunted some, motivated others. The businessman in 5B who pretended to sleep through the confrontation later told his wife it was the most cowardly moment of his life. He spent the next years trying to make up for that silence. The ripples continue even now. The Row 3 protocol is taught in customer service training worldwide. The phrase, "don't be a Patricia," has entered the lexicon as shorthand for checking your biases. Be a Margaret means speaking up for what's right, but perhaps the most important legacy is the understanding that change is possible. Richard Brennan proved that privilege can be acknowledged and redirected toward justice. Patricia proved that even deep-seated prejudice can be confronted and overcome. The passengers proved that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when faced with injustice. As you finish this story, we ask you to think about your own Row 3 moments. When have you witnessed discrimination? What did you do? What will you do next time? Because there will be a next time, there always is. Comment below and tell us, what would you have done on that flight? Have you experienced your own Row 3 moment? Where are you watching from, and what does this story mean in your community? And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. Not just for more stories, but to be part of a community committed to bearing witness, speaking truth, and creating change. The plane that took off from Chicago that December morning carried 42 passengers. It landed in Los Angeles with 42 changed lives. Some changes were small, a shifted perspective, a questioned assumption. Others were fundamental, careers ended, new purposes found, entire worldviews reconstructed. But every change mattered. Every person who left that plane different than they boarded it became a seed of possibility in their own community. The math is simple but powerful. 42 people, each touching dozens of other lives, each of those touching dozens more. The ripples expand exponentially. That's how change happens, not in grand gestures or sweeping legislation, though those matter too, but in moments, in choices, in the decision to stand up, speak out, or sit down and listen. In the harder decision to look at yourself honestly and commit to being better. Patricia now tells her story to new employees at the community center, using her shame as a teaching tool. "I was so sure I was right," she tells them. "That certainty blinded me to my own bias. Always question your certainty, especially when it involves deciding who belongs and who doesn't." Richard speaks at business schools, his message unwelcome to some but necessary for all. "Success can insulate you from reality," he says. "The more power you have, the more important it is to examine how you use it and who benefits from it." Margaret Chen, now in her late 70s, still substitutes occasionally. But she's also written a book, Standing Up at Any Age, A Teacher's Guide to Everyday Activism. It's become required reading in several education programs. Diana Reeves came out of retirement fully, establishing a nonprofit that provides legal support for discrimination victims. She named it the Row 3 Foundation, and both Obama sisters serve on its board. James Patterson's documentation app has recorded thousands of incidents, creating a database that researchers use to track patterns of discrimination and design interventions. Derek became one of the airline industry's most respected trainers on bias and discrimination. He never forgets to tell his trainees, "Your silence is complicity. I was silent once. The cost was too high." The airline itself underwent a complete cultural transformation. The CEO, who initially wanted to minimize the incident, instead made it the centerpiece of a massive reform effort. "We failed that day," he said at the announcement. "But failure can be the beginning of success if you learn from it." They did learn. Their new policies became industry standard. Their training videos, featuring actual footage from that flight, are watched by millions of customer service employees worldwide. But the most powerful moment might have come years later at Sasha Obama's wedding. Among the guests, surprisingly, were Margaret Chen and Diana Reeves. During the reception, Sasha made an unexpected toast. "I want to thank some special guests, 2 women who didn't know me but stood up for me when it mattered." "Mrs. Chen and Judge Reeves, you taught me that strangers can become allies, that courage is contagious, and that justice isn't just about laws, it's about people choosing to act." The room erupted in applause, but Margaret and Diana simply nodded, tears in their eyes. They hadn't acted for recognition or reward. They'd acted because it was right. But seeing the impact, seeing how one moment of courage created countless others, that was reward enough. As the years pass, the story of Flight 447 from Chicago to Los Angeles becomes legend, but also lesson. It's studied in schools, referenced in courtrooms, cited in diversity training. But most importantly, it lives in the actions of those who hear it and think, next time I'll speak up, next time I'll do better, next time I'll be brave. Because that's the ultimate message of Row 3. We all have power, the power to perpetuate prejudice or interrupt it. The power to remain comfortable or create change. The power to be Patricia at the beginning of the flight or Margaret standing up, Diana speaking out, Richard acknowledging wrong, Patricia committing to growth. The choice is ours. Every day in countless small moments, we choose who we are and who we're becoming. We choose whether to assume or ask, whether to dismiss or discover, whether to maintain or transform. The Obama sisters continued their lives, achieving their own successes separate from their father's legacy but informed by that day on the plane. Malia's political career focused on civil rights and social justice. Sasha became a documentary filmmaker, telling stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. In one of her documentaries, Sasha interviewed Patricia 15 years after the flight. "Do you forgive yourself?" Sasha asked. Patricia thought for a long moment. "No. But I've learned to live with myself, to use my shame productively, to make sure my worst moment leads to others' better moments." "And has it?" Patricia smiled sadly. "You'd have to ask them. All I know is I try every day to be better than I was that day. That's all any of us can do, try to be better today than we were yesterday." The documentary ends with footage from that flight, grainy phone videos showing the confrontation, the intervention, the resolution. But the final image is unexpected. Security footage from the gate area before boarding, showing all the passengers as strangers, unaware of how their lives were about to intersect and change. The message is clear. We never know when our moment will come. When we'll be called to stand up, speak out, or stand down. We never know when a routine flight will become a defining moment, when strangers will become allies or adversaries, when our assumptions will be challenged and our character tested. But we can prepare. We can examine our biases now before they're exposed publicly. We can practice courage in small moments so we're ready for big ones. We can choose growth over comfort, justice over ease, truth over convenience. The flight from Chicago to Los Angeles on that December morning was scheduled to take 5 hours. In those 5 hours, 42 lives changed trajectory. Some rose to their best selves. Others fell to their worst before beginning to climb back up. All were transformed. That's the power of a moment. That's the importance of choice. That's the legacy of Row 3. As you close this story, as you return to your own life, carry with you this question. When your Row 3 moment comes, and it will come, who will you choose to be? Will you be silent or vocal, complicit or courageous? Will you assume or inquire? Will you maintain the status quo or demand better? The choice is yours. It always has been. It always will be. And in that choice lies the power to change not just a flight, not just a day, but the trajectory of countless lives, starting with your own. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Thank you for witnessing this story. Thank you for considering its implications for your own life. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Comment below with your thoughts, your own experiences, your commitments to action. Tell us where you're watching from, because discrimination is global, but so is the courage to fight it. Most importantly, remember, you have power. Use it wisely, use it bravely, use it now. Because somewhere right now, someone is sitting in their own Row 3, facing their own Patricia, needing their own Margaret to stand up, their own Diana to speak out, their own witnesses to document truth. That someone might be you. That Margaret might be you. That witness might be you. The question isn't whether you'll face your Row 3 moment. The question is, when you do, who will you choose to be? The flight from Chicago to Los Angeles landed years ago, but its lessons continue to soar. May they lift you to be better, braver, and more willing to turn moments of discrimination into opportunities for transformation. May we all find the courage to stand up, speak out, and create change, one row, one flight, one moment at a time. This is the story of Flight 447. But more than that, it's the story of who we are and who we can become when we choose courage over comfort, action over silence, growth over stagnation. The choice is yours. The moment is now. The world is watching. What will you do with your Row 3 moment?